Welcome to Living Legends, a podcast telling the stories and celebrating the lives of seniors, presented by GrandPad and the Leighton Media Podcast Network.
Welcome to Living Legends, the podcast that honors the wisdom, life lessons, and extraordinary experiences of older adults who have lived life boldly and have incredible stories to share. I'm Scott Lien, CEO and co-founder of GrandPad, and it's my privilege to guide you through these inspiring conversations with some of these remarkable people. We call them living legends. Throughout my years working on technology designed to empower seniors, I've had the opportunity to hear countless stories that aren't just captivating, but also full of profound insights. This podcast is about sharing those stories with you, our listeners, so we can all benefit from the journeys of these individuals. During each episode, we'll sit down with a special guest who's navigated life's highs and lows, emerging with wisdom that can only come from experience. Whether we're discussing resilience, the value of family, or discovering new purpose later in life, there's always something meaningful to take away. No matter your age, these stories are for everyone. Get ready to be inspired, to laugh, to reflect, and look at life through a new lens. In today's episode, we're joined by Carol Pagel, a retired kindergarten teacher who is just turned 87. We always like to say 87 years young. Today, we'll explore some of the life lessons that she's learned about, and with a special emphasis on some of her teaching career. We all remember that book called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. So we're going to hear from a kindergarten teacher today, and welcome, Carol.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let's just start, Carol, and if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, where were you brought up, and just a little bit about your work career.
Well, thank you, Scott. I was brought up in North Dakota and born in Valley City, North Dakota. Both of my parents were educators. My mother taught in country schools and then in small towns. My father taught high school and then went on and got his administrative degree, and after that time was a superintendent in the little small towns we lived in. It was just an amazing time for a kid my age because his office was full of paper and pencils and things kids like to get into. So there was nothing more fun than to go to Dad's office, and I'd get in the wastebasket because there would be all kinds of paper that hadn't been written on in there, except maybe on one side. I'd turn it over and draw and cut and play with all the papers in that office and had a good time. He didn't mind that I enjoyed it so much. A small town at that time, the first little town we lived in called Oriska had little kids nearby, and my mother volunteered also to make the hot lunch baked potatoes every day in her oven. So the kids that were in probably 5th, 6th grade were sent over to our house to pick up the baked potatoes for the hot lunch program in this little town. And I knew the kids would be coming, so I would be by the door, and the minute I heard them, I'd yell. She said at the top of my lung, "Come in, kids, come in, come in, kids." It was always fun to see the bigger kids, and they'd come get the potatoes and leave, and that just made my day. I'd seen the big kids come. Anyway, we had such a good time in that little town in the spring making mud pies. I can remember sitting at the picnic table with the mud pies that we had a little bakery, and we all had our mud pies we made and decorated with leaves and little bits of things. And it was just a wonderful time to grow up there. I was probably 6.
So what year was this?
This would have been the early 40s.
And what was the population of the town?
Oh, my goodness. Maybe 500 people. I don't know for sure, but I've forgotten now. But Oriska is still there, but it's much changed from what it was way back then. But I just thought it was a wonderful place. I had all these kids to play with. They all loved to make mud pies and play with me in the yard. They were older than I was by a few years. But anyway, that was Oriska. Then my dad had a teaching job in another small town, but a little bigger than Oriska, called Findlay. It's near Mayville, if you've heard of Mayville in North Dakota. I know there's one in Wisconsin, I believe it is. That was the time that I was probably 8, 9. And the thing I remember is you could play all over town. and no one was worried about you. We would play games all over, run to one another's homes, and it would be evening. It was after dinner, and we're out playing kick the can or whatever the game was we were having fun with. Remember Auntie I over with the ball on the roof of the roof of the garage, and all those fun games, and loved it. We just had to be home before it got a certain time, and I don't even remember. It just, when kids started to go, I went, home. But you played and played night after night outside, running around.
And it was safe, and all the parents kind of watched out for all the kids, and the kids all got along, and they made their own fun, right?
That I was worried about anything. We were just having fun.
Yeah. I have to say that game I kind of forgot about, where for our listeners, my young people might not know about this, but so you had two teams.
Yep.
You'd do it like over the garage, like a standalone garage or a shed that was out in the yard.
Yep.
You'd have a ball or an apple or whatever you had, and you'd throw it up, Annie over, send Scotty right over, or whatever it was, and then you wouldn't get over the roof as pigtails, and then you'd run around and all this, right?
That's the one.
Right?
Yeah, that's the one we played.
I thought maybe that was just in Iowa we played that. Okay, that was a universal kids game. All right. So now let's jump forward now to the current, and just tell us a little bit about your family and your life in the last, say, 5 or 10 years, because you have some pretty interesting things that are unique for you.
Well, my husband and I were married in 59, and in about 62, we had a son. And then a couple of years later, we had a daughter. And then about 6 years later, we had another daughter. So we have a family of 3 children. Nowadays, David is in Duluth. Amy lives right here in Wabasha, and Angie is in South Minneapolis, and she's teaching in Edina right now. They're all, David was not a teacher. He's the only one in the family that did not go into teaching. Otherwise, the girls were both teachers. My granddaughter, the oldest, and that's Amy's daughter, is one of 5 generations of teachers. Every one of them had a daughter that became a teacher from 5 generations down. So we weren't surprised when she said she was going to be a teacher. I said, Emily, that made the 5th generation of teachers in our family. Anyway, David is the holdout, and he was the mountain climber. He loves to climb mountains all over the world, and has, and written stories and books about his climbs. Superior Climbs, he lives in Duluth, is the name of the climbing book it's a compilation of a lot of stories that he wrote for climbing magazines and so on. So that's my family. I was taught mainly kindergarten. I did teach 6th grade for 1 year when their 6th grade teacher became ill, and I had not gone back to kindergarten teaching yet, and they called and asked if I would fill in that year. So that year I was a 6th grade teacher, but I was anxious to get back to my kindergarten class. One of the things we did when the kindergartners first came is kind of see where they were with what they knew, and so I would sit down with them at a little table and say, count for me and see how far you can go. And, 1, 2, 3, and then they stop. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. Do you think you could go any higher? Like this. Their head would bob, and then they'd say, 7, 8, 9, 10. Very literal, about how they could climb. But they were a fun bunch, always. Every year it was fun because they were wonderful kids, and we had a good time. And it got so my family would say, what happened in kindergarten today, Mom? Because there would always be some story that was wonderful. Probably my best story is when the kindergartners graduated and then went on to 1st grade. I had a little boy that went into the 1st grade teacher's room. It was now noon, and they were used to at noon in kindergarten. They would go home on the bus at noon. So she found him in the coat room, and he was getting his coat and getting his cap, and she said, oh, no, Charlie, you don't have to go home. You're in 1st grade now. You can be here all day. And he said, who the hell signed me up for this? And that was exactly how he said it. I laughed when she told me that. I thought, yep. It's just what Charlie would say.
Oh, that's so good, Carol. Yeah, we can all think back of kindergarten. I still remember my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Schrader, I think, because it's the first time you go out. Back then, you didn't really ever go to preschool or anything. That was the first time you went from being just a kid, playing to going to school and getting some structure in your life. So what do you see as the big differences with school then? When was the last time you taught? How many years ago?
Oh my gosh, how many years ago that I taught?
When did you retire?
Oh, I was 65 pretty much. Close to 65, 64 or 5.
Yeah, okay, so you probably retired in the 90s.
98, I think.
To me, and my only son is 30 years old, but it just seems like if somebody had kids, especially teenagers today, it just seems harder now to be a teenager. Do you think so?
Oh, definitely. And teaching is different than it ever used to be. There was such respect for teachers way back then. They really, if the teacher asked or told you to do something, there was never a question about doing it. They were just on top of it. And I don't see that respect anymore, especially in upper grades. Little kids, kindergartners, first, second graders are still very respectful, most of them. But I don't see that always with older kids. It's tough to see that there's a problem with discipline, because I think we'd have more teachers if that wasn't the issue, that kids are not respectful. They say anything they want to say.
So we mentioned in the opening the book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And you said you have a kind of a summary of that hanging on your wall. What are some of the lessons from that book that you kind of experienced in your life?
My goodness, that's such a fun book. Our picture my son gave me for my birthday one year, and I have it hanging in one of my rooms in my home. And it just says, one thing I always remember, it says, everybody needs to have a chocolate chip cookie and a nap. Every day you should have a cookie and a nap. And I thought, that's very good advice. It just has wonderful things about when you're going walking, have a friend with you, hold hands when you go for a walk. And it just, simple little things that are really the kind of philosophy you wish grown-ups had, because it's simple things that make life much happier. And I thought that was a good thing to hang in my home.
Yeah, one of them that stood out in the book for me and really relates to what Grandpad's all about also is connectedness. So the author of the book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, importance of community and human connection, working together, helping create a more harmonious world, and having lots of friends and family and just people you can really be close to. So I wanted you to tell our listeners about getting married a couple years ago.
Well, that's right. In the 25th, John and I will celebrate our 3rd wedding anniversary. I came to Wabasha because my daughter, Amy, lives here, and she kept saying, Mom, you've been at the lake long enough. I had lived there now 12 years, 13, going on 13 since Bruce passed away. And I had many friends there that I got together with, and I did not feel lonely, but there was a lot of work to be done with the house on the lake. You know how it is. And she would say, it's time for you to let somebody else enjoy the cabin. Come down to Wabasha. And she kept on. The other kids agreed. I think you should too, Mom. Go down where Amy lives. And well, anyway, I said to her one day, all right, if you find a house you think I would like to move into, you go look and then call me if you find something. She called the next day. She said, Mom, I found your house. I said, you are kidding me. No, I'm not. She said, you've got to come and see it, and it won't be on the market long, so you've got to come right away. So I said, all right, I'll come right down. So I drove down the next day and took a look. And my husband was a very outdoorsman, loved nature and anything about it. And as we walked out the side door of this house, there sat an eagle on a branch on the tree right there, just sitting there. I've never seen that eagle there since, and I don't know how it happened to be there that day, but when I saw that eagle, I thought, this is the house I should have. And it turned out to be a very good house for me to be in. I loved it. Well, along the way, I met some fun ladies, and they were having a going-away party for a lady who was moving, and they invited me to come. Amy, my daughter, had also been invited. So we went, and at the party, one of the gals I'd met came up to me and said, have you ever met John Oxner? And he was standing beside her, and I thought this was a neighbor of hers, and she's trying to get me acquainted with town and so on. And I said, no, I haven't. And he put his hand out, and I shook his hand, and his hand was just ice cold. And I said, oh, my goodness, you've got a cold hand. And he put his other hand on top, and he said, but it's getting warmer. I said, oh, nice try. To put my hands up like this. Anyway, I thought, all right, I've met her neighbor. Anyway, then I walked over to put a coat away a little later that was on the back of my chair, and here was this little group of people standing. And I happened to notice he was part of that little group. And a lady named KK stepped out, and she said, Carol, do you like to dance? And I kind of took a step back. I thought, what's she talking about? And I said, yeah, I like to dance. Oh, the doctor loves to dance, she said. I thought, who in the world is the doctor? I don't know any doctor. And then she said, do you like to snowshoe? And I said, well, I've never snowshoed before. But, oh, the doctor loves to snowshoe. Again, who in the world is the doctor? And then John said about the dancing part, he said, you don't need to dance right now. She's just asking. I think he thought I had panicked because I was going to have to dance or something. Anyway, that's how we met, is at that party. And then he went with a friend home, and I went with Amy home and didn't hear from him again. And Amy said, have you heard from John yet? I said, no, I've not heard from John. I don't think I'll hear from him again. Oh, yes, you will, she said. I don't know. It's just taking him a while. He's getting his nerve up. So John tells me now that he said he went home without my name, my number, how to reach me in any way. And Dee, the gal that had introduced us, had gone south for the winter. So he had no way to get a hold of her to find out. So he said, I just thought, well, Dee'll be back pretty soon, and then I can ask her. I said, what? That's how you thought? You could wait till somebody came? Why couldn't you just go to the library and ask?
I'm 87 here. The clock is ticking.
I couldn't believe it. But one day down the road, the phone rang. And I answered it, and this voice said, hi, this is John Oxner. And he said, I've just made a lobster bisque and a nice green salad. Would you like to come over for lunch? And I said, that sounds very nice. I'd love to. He said, I'll come and pick you up. And I said, no, you don't need to do that. I have a car, and I know where you live. And I thought maybe I shouldn't have said that. But Amy had driven by and shown me where he lived the night before. So I said, I'll come. And he said, well, I just want to tell you how to get in, to where to park. Don't park in front and so on. So anyway, we got that settled, and I went to the house, and he met me at the door with a glass of wine, and he said, would you care for a glass of wine, and I'll show you the house. And I thought, oh, my gosh, this is amazing. I'll show you the house. Of course, everyone wants to see a lovely house. So I said, well, that would be nice, and took the wine, and we went in then, I think, right away and had dinner. He said, I'll show you the house a little later, and the dinner's ready now. So we sat down and had a lovely dinner and talked, and he showed me the house, and we came into the living room. He had a fire in the fireplace. We sat there, and anyway, the rest is history. It all worked out. We had a lot to talk about, and pretty soon we were going back and forth, and that's when COVID had hit. Couldn't go to my daughter's, but John and I had been together from the day one of COVID, so we could go to each other's homes, and that's what we did. We took turns going for dinner.
Yeah, and then got married right after COVID, right?
Yes, at the end of COVID, and 3 years ago.
It's fantastic, Carol.
Yeah.
So
who would have ever thought at our age we were going to get married, again? We just never, that was not at all in my radar. Yeah. But it turned out to be very lovely.
One last question, then we'll wrap up. So, Carol, I have to tell you, you're such a positive, upbeat person. You have a wonderful laugh, and whenever I'm with you, I laugh more than with anyone else because it's fun. So, and I am a big believer in power of positive thinking and being upbeat. I always say we all have a choice every day. We can be sour and Debbie Downer, or we can be positive and upbeat, and you surely are a positive person. How do you stay so positive?
Well, I don't think about staying positive. I just enjoy every day. I've got nothing to complain about. I'm happy. I have good friends that make me happy, and you're one of them, you and Sally. You make us happy. Just good people around and enjoying life. I've always felt that there was a plan for me, and that was in the plan, and I'm very thrilled that it was.
Well done. Well, thank you, Carol, for being with us. Those are just such great lessons for all of us. And I would just say thank you to all of our listeners for listening to these great lessons from Carol. Make sure you subscribe to Living Legends podcast and share it with others. Check us out at GrandPad. Follow us at grandpad.net. And of course, we're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and all the others. Thank you, Carol, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much. It was nice to be here.
You've been listening to Living Legends, a podcast celebrating the lives and stories of seniors, presented by GrandPad and the Lien Media Podcast Network. You'll find Living Legends at WinonaRadio.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to like and subscribe.